morning, we were exploring the notion of masks, the fact that women hide behind a variety of masks. We wear masks at different times, and women incarcerated are absolutely no different. Their survival while they're on the inside and their survival on the outside, different masks, different things. But we did take this notion of masks to a variety of institutions across Saskatchewan. We were down at Maple Creek at the Regional Psychiatric Center. We didn't take any of the masks to Pine Grove, our provincial correctional, and we did take some of these masks to the Edmonton institution. So again, before we start representing that voice of nothing for us without us, I'm going to read you two masks. And so this is done by one woman, and she has two parts of her mask. So the first part is through the shadows. Through the shadows of my memory, I dared to dream. Always from afar, looking out to distance, hope that maybe one day I would be there and not here. There has to be more to this, more to me. Is it possible to be literally born at the wrong place at the wrong time? And if yes, there has to be a why. I see colors through these shadows, faint but out there. One day I will reach that distance, that dream. Never dreamed in sleep, but dreamed with eyes open. 6 months later, her art is this. Living the dream wide awake and so aware of everything around me. The colors are not just bright, but alive. The smells reach my core and I can't breathe any further to hold it close. The feels of nature, days and seasons move around and through me. Once the shadows were gone, I could see so much more of the world and people around me. I could see myself and see all the work that needed to be done. I'm in a better place for this to be done, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but most importantly, spiritually. My Creator has brought me to this greater place and has always been there waiting for me, with the promise of unconditional love. Hi to all my elders and all my friends. So this morning we're going to speak with a few women who have had some experiences incarcerated, a life that needs to be acknowledged of pre-incarceration or pre-judicial system, and a life after that is very successful for these three women. So I'd like to introduce the panel: Chantel Huel, Jorgina Sunn, and Paula Jacobs St. Germaine. So Chantel is going to start. We're going to do this sort of like an interview. We're all nervous, so I said we're just going to pretend we're at Tim Hortons having coffee together. So they're going to tell a little bit of their story, and then I'm going to ask them a few other questions. So, and then it's up to you after to ask them questions, and it's up to them to decide whether or not they answer those questions. So, Chantel, can you go first? Yeah, just who you are.
My name is Chantel Huel. I'm 38 years old. I'm originally from Regina, Saskatchewan. I have 3 children and 5 out here.
Can you hear? Technical difficulties at Tim Hortons already. Sherry's Karen.
Did this one work? Okay. My name is Chantel Huel. I'm 38 years old, originally from Regina, Saskatchewan. I have 3 children and 5 beautiful granddaughters. I'm still serving on a 4.5-year sentence for drug trafficking and weapon trafficking. And for me, I need to go back to the beginning to figure out what got me there. And I'm a product of rape. I was born out of rape, so my whole life I didn't know where I belonged. My first sexual experience was at the age of 4, obviously not by choice, and that became the norm for me for my whole life. I was raised in a home, a white family, and I had a silver spoon in my mouth. I was given anything and everything I wanted, and there was one thing lacking, and that was love. I was never told I was loved until It's about a year ago when I got out. And my mom told me for the first time that I loved her, that she loved me, sorry. At the age of 12, I always knew I was adopted, and I had many questions, and I always wanted to know how I came to be. And it's weird because I went back home for a visit to Regina this past weekend, and it was really hard, and I sat for hours talking with my adopted mom about this. I said, "You never told me." I said, "But something in my heart told me that it wasn't good." And she said, "I didn't think you needed to know." And when I found out I was a product of rape, I felt dirty. I was born out of a crime. And that's where my life on the streets began. So I grew up in two different worlds. I grew up in, the society with all the money and everything that was given to me. And I chose not to go that way. I grew up on the streets where I handpicked my family. By the age of 16, I had been stabbed. I had been shot. I knew a life of drugs, crime, and everything that goes with it. And I don't like to focus on my past because I don't live there anymore, right? So I graduated grade 12. I was on the 5-year plan, and I graduated with 2 kids, and I went on to get my education. And I got a diploma in office education, and I didn't want to do that. And I got my child and youth care diploma, and I also got my educational assistant. And I worked for social services in Regina. I worked for corrections and public safety. I worked in open care facilities, and I worked for Regina Public School Board. And this whole time I'm trying to help people, but all along I'm drowning because I don't know how to help myself. I don't know how to ask for help. So it was a struggle. I come from a background of sexual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse. And I was lost, and I numbed everything because I didn't want to feel, because when you grow up on the streets, you don't trust, you don't feel, and you don't talk. I didn't just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to be a prostitute, I want to stick needles in my arms, I want to go to jail." That was the norm for me. And they would arrest me, and I would get out on bail, and I would be back 20 days later. And they would release me on the bracelet, and I would be back 19 days later. And there was one time in my incarceration, I sat on Unit 1 in Pine Grove. My daughter was on Unit 2, and my mom was on Unit 4 upstairs. And I was like, wow. This is a generational thing, and somebody's got to break this. And that's when I started praying, and I phoned my lawyer. I was like, I'm guilty. And I pled guilty. I pled out. I was actually talking to somebody about this yesterday. I pled guilty to 33 charges. Obviously not all mine, and I got sentenced on 11 of them, and 22 dropped. I got transferred from Pine Grove to Okama-Ochi Healing Lodge, and I was just going to do my time because I didn't want to work on me, and I thought doing my time was going to be the easiest thing, and I was going to go back to what I was in jail for, because that's what I was good at. And my institutional parole officer sat me down, and she said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Guns and drugs." She said, "No, why are you here? Go to the beginning." And that's where my healing started. And I don't know, you heard John Sugar talk this morning. His first experience was in a sweat lodge. And that's where my first experience of healing began. It was in that sweat lodge. And I keep following those ways. Along the way, I've been out for almost 11 months. I get to leave the halfway house in 15 days, and I've accomplished great things. When you're in a federal institution, you get way more programming than you do in a provincial institution. And I worked my program, and I work it every day. And on my healing plan, I had to do an emotional healing plan, a spiritual healing plan, a mental healing plan, and a physical healing plan. And I made goals. And one of my goals was to work for E-Fry. And I got out, and I walked in that door, and that was on my first day of release. I walked into the doors of E-Fry, and I never walked out. And I volunteered. I spent every single hour there because it was better than being in a halfway house. I continue my Red Road healing journey. I continue my spirituality. I continue to follow all the ways that I was taught there. And one of the greatest things that I remember from December 17th, 2014 is Kim Pate picked me up at the E-Fry office, and we left to go to a sweat lodge. My Mushum's the elder at Wanuskewin, and some of you will experience Wanuskewin on Saturday. And she was interviewing me along the way, and she's got her recorder, and we're driving, and it's falling over. And, I looked at her, and I said, jail changed my life. And she's just like, looking at me, what's the matter with you? And she goes, are you sure it was jail? Are you sure it wasn't you finding your spirituality? And I said, you know what? That's exactly what it was. Every day's a struggle. I fall every day. I get challenged every day by my boss. And some days I'm scared because you want me to do what with a computer? And I'm just learning how to be a mom all over. And my daughter's 22 and she's in the life, and I'm watching a mirror image of myself. And it's hard. It's very hard. I set that boundary, and that boundary is the highway from Saskatoon to Regina. And I cry all the way home, and I cry all the way back to Saskatoon, and it's hard. And all I can do is lead by example. I used to share my story lots, and now I just let people meet me for who I am. And, I've had some questions. Well, where'd you learn how to bead? In jail. Well, what, huh? So it's like, it's a story. We all have a story, right? And I can choose to get stuck in that revolving door, or I can succeed, and I choose to succeed. One of the saddest things for me in my experience is watching all these women when I first got to jail and spending time with them on the same journey, getting taken back because I'm allowed to go back to where I came from for visits, and going to visit them in jail. And it's hard for me to grasp that concept, right? But I don't know, that's just a bit about me for now, so.
Thank you. Chantel.
Good morning. My name is Jorgina Sunn. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge our elder for the prayer this morning. Thank you very much for that. I'm also 38 years old. Before I start too, I'd also like to thank Sue for inviting me to sit here today. Sue and I have done some work, and I've known Sue for about 5 years now. She's watched me stand up and struggle and fall and get back up. So it's an honor to be here today to share my experience, strength, and hope with you. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta on November 5th, 1976. That makes me 38 years old today. And I was born by Beatrice Adams of the Paul Band First Nation, which is just outside of Edmonton. Shortly after I was born, my brother and I were apprehended because my parents weren't able to care for us. Parents were both products of the residential schools and both stuck in their alcoholism. So it was before I was 1 year old that we were taken away and put in the child welfare system. I experienced all kinds of trauma in the foster homes that I was in. I went through, probably more than half a dozen. One memory I have of being in the foster home was somebody had their hand inside my diaper. I think I was about 18 months old. So it's basically how my life started off. 4 years old, I was adopted by a couple and raised in Canmore, Alberta. They also adopted 2 more children, so that made me the second oldest of 4. And there was an incredible amount of pressure. Ultimately, my childhood had been stripped away from me because my adopted father was also sexually abusing my sister and I. So it started from the time I was 4 until I disclosed to my mom when I was 13 what was going on, and that happened probably 2 or 3 times a day. And, my adopted mom had no clue what was going on, so, I was angry at her and resentful for the fact she didn't protect me. And, going to school for me was also a very negative experience. I got picked on a lot because I was one of the only First Nations kids in a school of 1,800. I think there was 8 of us. And so every day it was normal to be called a squaw, wagon burner. I got dirt thrown at me. I got bullied and picked on every single day. So by the time I was about 13 years old, I was very much a walking time bomb. I had no respect for authorities, rules, teachers. I had no conception of what it meant to, self-confidence, so I didn't do my homework. When I did do my homework, I actually did very well. And the one thing that I remember as a young person was how, the arts really appealed to me. So I was good at, writing, creative writing, painting, drawing, singing. I was also taking piano lessons. So these are the times when I had solace and I had serenity away from the chaos that I was in as a young person, because that's what it was. By the time I was 16 years old, I was quite ready to not be at home and not be in school. So I smoked my first joint and I got drunk for the first time, and I continued on that path. Found myself in Calgary at 22 years old, homeless, broke, and shoplifting to support a crack cocaine habit. My addiction led me to provincial and federal incarceration. My first provincial charges were mostly theft unders and breach, failing to comply with conditions. And I remember I was in a high-speed chase once because the person that I was with, they had stolen a lawyer's vehicle, and they put us on the 6 o'clock news, and I'd wanted to be famous, but not like that. So I remember, but I remember sitting in the cell afterwards, and, the cop came in and he said, "Did you know the vehicle was stolen?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And so I got charged with the theft of a vehicle, and they gave me my first 90 days. So they shipped me off to Lethbridge Correctional. I've served time in Lethbridge, Edmonton, Victoria, Calgary, and I ended up in the Okama-Ochi Healing Lodge as well. The last time that I served time was in 2007, was when my warrant expiry date ended. For the first 6 months, I was in the Healing Lodge. It was the first time that I experienced, exposure to my First Nations culture, because I wasn't raised on the reserve, and I was raised in a non-First Nations home. And the feelings of defeat, the feelings of oppression, the feelings of being marginalized and feeling less than, it was just so normal for me. I had no conception of what it meant to be healthy and to feel good about myself. And I did violate my conditions when I was on parole once. My parole officer didn't send me back, but the day that my parole finished, I was drunk and high again. So ultimately, it wasn't incarceration that helped me to get my life together. It was when I found myself in a hotel room in Calgary almost 3 years ago, where I was planning to end my life because of everything that had happened to me. So you take the trauma of the childhood, the trauma of being bullied, the trauma of everything that one has to do when they're hunting and gathering to feed their addiction, all the crime. I too prostituted myself. Found myself once walking on the Highway of Tears in Prince George because I was at the end of my rope, and found myself in all kinds of precarious situations. So, by the time, having not done any kind of inside work, it's not a wonder that I wanted to die. But I called my brother, and he put me on the bus and sent me back here to Saskatoon. When I got back to Saskatoon and I walked back into the 12-step rooms, and I said, "Okay, my name's Jorgina and I'm coming back, and I'm a piece of SHIT, and you guys can all go F yourselves." I was very, very defiant, and I was still detoxing, and this longtime member in there says to me, "Georgina, I don't think you know what it means to have any self-respect." And she wasn't saying it to attack me, but it was 2 days later that I found myself sitting outside of the Francis Morrison Library downtown. It was August 24th, nice and hot day, and somebody walked by that had known me for years, and she'd seen me try and sober up, and she said, "How's it going?" And I said, I'm fine. And she stood there looking at me, and all of a sudden it occurred to both of us at the same time. There was nothing that she could do to help me. It was absolutely up to me. So, from that time, I had to go get counseling, and I found myself a couple of friends in the 12-step programs. I reconnected with Sue, and I ultimately started to face everything inside me that I was running away from, for decades, 3 decades that I was trying to, numb my pain through the crack and the alcohol and the pot and the pills and everything else that I was doing. Later on, it would be sex and gambling and men and food, cigarettes, and the list goes on. So a little bit about what I do today. I'm a member of Straight Up, 10,000 Little Steps to Healing. I work there as a mentor and often present my story in the community. I'm also a speaker with the International Indigenous Speakers Bureau. Signed my contract last month, I think, so that's a big deal for me, is ultimately go around and share my story of the recovery of myself, which is the way that I like to put it. I also am a board member for several different nonprofit organizations, ultimately bringing my voice of the person with a lived experience. I currently live in second stage housing for domestic abuse because another thing that I looked for out there was love. So I ultimately, connected with people who treated me like crap. And the last 6 months, I've been able to sort of arise out of there and say, you know what, I am worth something more, and I don't need a man or anybody else to make me feel good about myself. And that's just the next part of my healing. 3 weeks ago, I celebrated 1,000 days of sobriety, so in August it'll be 3 years. And like my friend Paula and I like to say when we go to our meetings, is that it took us like 20 years to get a year of sobriety, so it's good to be able to celebrate that. On a personal note, I like anybody that's recovering or healing, I have my good days and my not so good days, but I have lots to be thankful for today. My life and my freedom. And not just the freedom from living outside of a cell, but emotional freedom, and that emotional sobriety that a lot of people, I think, and I hope, are trying to success. Otherwise, what are we all doing here? My greatest passion is music. So we're currently recording an album which talks about my journey, and I'm working with some fantastic artists in the community, well known here in Saskatoon, to put together a music video and an album and a cover, and officially launch Jorgina Sunn music within the next year. So it's very exciting, having come from the places that I've come from. It's great to be able to not be that statistic, and ultimately that stigma around being an Aboriginal woman. For the most part, it's why I do everything that I do today, to break that stigma and say, you know what, stop judging me. Stop judging people like me. It's not up to you. I have fought and clawed my way sometimes to get to where I'm at today, and I'd ultimately like to just live my life instead of survive, and, just continue to share stories and listen to the stories of women like Chantel and Sue and Paula and all of you who are doing what we can to change the world. So thanks very much.
Hi, my name is Paula Jacob St. Germaine, and I'm so used to saying I'm a recovering alcoholic, because I am, and I go to a lot of meetings, so when I do share, I'm gonna totally cry if you keep bugging me. Thank you for Sue for inviting me, and Chantel and Jorgina and their stories, and for everyone here that I trust is in a field of wanting to help and move forward with healing. I too am a grandmother of 4 and a mother of 3. My story is similar to Jorgina's in a way. I'm a direct result of the intergenerational effect of residential school. I've learned in the last actually just 3-4 years that I inherited shame, honestly. My grandmother had it, my cookum, and my mother, and then myself. And it was just that unspoken feeling that was passed down. I watched how my mother behaved, my grandmother behaved, and they were discriminated upon, and my father was white, my mother's Cree. So I witnessed a lot of this and felt it, like you just felt it. And again, there was the rules of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Our house was a party house, so there was, anything goes, in a home where alcohol and drug abuse is, where alcohol and drug abuse is a priority, right? And that was just everyone trying to feed the hole in their soul. I'm happy to say that I am now, I'll talk a little bit about my story, where I come from, but I'm more really enthused today with I just graduated, I'm an addictions counselor today.
Yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday, yeah. And, I'm in my 7th year of recovery, but I too have a history of being locked up and in and out and of correctional facilities. More so when I was a youth, though. I spent the ages of 13 to 18 in juvenile institutions across Western Canada. And, looking back, it was first Kilburn Hall, and then it was Dojack, and, I was the first girl in Dojack, and Vancouver and EYOC and stuff. And besides the fact that there were a few occasions where I was isolated and locked up for 30 days at a time, like in the hole, they call it, right, kind of thing. So they called the whole Dale's house, eh? They sent you to Regina, and it was this kind of open custody, closed custody downstairs facility. And closed custody was 2 rooms, and that was it. You got out for half an hour and you showered and stuff like that. So at the age of 14, I spent, I was an asshole. Excuse my language, I can't swear here, sorry. I was just very angry, growing up the way that I did. I was just in complete reactive mode all the time. And then when I wound up, stealing cars and getting sentenced by Judge Arnault, it was really nice to see him today. I was like, hey, he sent me about 5 or 6 times. Right on. I want to introduce myself and say, hey, but he's probably sentenced thousands of kids. But anyway, I ended up there a few times, and being 14 and locked up for a month at a time, I got to do a lot of, I believe everything happens for a reason to some degree, and I really had to go inside myself to find, I believe we all have our own answers, and I had to go to a place where, imagine and just go to a place of peace, otherwise I would have went nuts. And they did give me some reading material, which was a bonus. And then I learned working at Elizabeth Fry for a short period of time that anything after 3 days of isolation is torture. I think one of the policies are that. And I was just like, wow, there was like, at least 20 times that I was, sent to, because I kept on escaping, and I had 14 escape lawful custodies. But it was because I was getting close to the end of my sentence, and I knew
It's okay. Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons.
I knew what was waiting for me when I got out. And that was a really unsafe place in a home filled with alcoholism. And being locked up, and I was safe. First time in Kilburn Hall I was 11, and then by 13. So every time that my sentence was coming to an end, I would escape and get more time. And if they didn't give me more time, I'd escape again and commit crimes. So during the years of 13 to 18, I spent the whole 5 years incarcerated, with a month here. And out of that 5-year term, I think it was a month that I was out on the street. And that was just, the safety. My mother was an alcoholic and fighting her own demons. Really just unable to feel and living in shame. And my sister was in the Ranchero in Regina. And my other sister was in foster care. And I'm still healing. It's just being up here in front of all you people. If you weren't here, I'd be fine. So just because there is a lot of heart and energy in this room, and I can feel it, and I'm grateful for it, and I've just learned over the last 7 years in recovery that when it comes up, not to stuff it, because that's all I did all my life. Stuff. And I didn't feel anything. And then as a result, when I was 18, I was a ticking time bomb too, and just very angry. I ended up going in and out of Pine Grove a few times for some violent offenses, and it was always alcohol related. Always. That was the only time that I felt comfortable in my own skin, is when I had some kind of anesthetic. And so this whole recovery process and learning how to live on life's terms has been, like the masks, everything is alive, and I'm awake, and the colors are brighter, and I have a lot more tears of gratitude today opposed to sadness. But looking back, and I don't all the time, is just it was things need to change. I don't believe in just locking people up and separating the person from contact. That's the last thing that will help anyone. It was really nice to see a lady that works at CTR when I was in the bathroom, because just being here is a reminder, because sometimes I still forget that my life was like that. I was on the streets and in and out of jail and unable to respond to anything. So I was really irresponsible. My kids were taken from me. And I'm glad that they were, because I was just unable. But I look after my granddaughter. She's 7, and I'm raising her today. And so it's kind of like round 2 and a second chance. But I still try to be available for my 2 daughters today, who are in their addiction, and the cycle has just repeated itself. So, like Chantel was sharing, I am doing everything I can in my power to break the cycle and make changes, and by attraction, not promotion. I've realized that I can't help my own. I can only, it wasn't my mother that got me clean. It was a complete stranger in actuality. So I just have to pray and be there for her and meet her where she's at. 3 of my granddaughters were born addicted. So I have 1, and 2 of them are in care. My story is not unique. Dear God, there are so many children that are in care that have been born addicted, and the mothers are struggling with addiction. I believe there are so many underlying issues besides the addiction, right? 15% of the problem is the drugs and alcohol. The other 85% is what's going on inside. So I'm really grateful to be employed at the Maxi Treatment Center. I'm giving back, and sharing my experience, strength, and hope, and healing along the way. I get it, and I care, and sorry for swearing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so this can go one of 2 different ways. So first of all, I just need to tell you how lucky I am to work around these very powerful women. I feel privileged every day to walk beside them in their journey. Chantel is right now our administrator in the Elizabeth Fry office. She probably knows more about anything than I do. So we're very lucky to have her with us. Jorgina is a fabulous musician and a great speaker. And Paula did a practicum with us as an addiction worker. And if you ever work in my office, even as a volunteer, I get you some way. So Paula's back doing some speaking with us. And she also helps with addiction programs. And the 2 of them run an AA group out of our office. So if you want to work with me, you'll be working with me. So I was going to ask them a couple of different questions, and the questions I would ask them is, what was their experience like in jail or prison? Does it work? Does it not work? And really, what has helped them to lift themselves up now? But I think they've answered some of those things. So would you like me to carry on and ask some questions, or would you guys like to ask some questions? Don't all jump up at once.
I just wanted to say thank you for opening your hearts and being vulnerable, and sharing your stories.
Thanks. Good. Anybody else have any specific questions?
A couple of you have mentioned the phrase "don't talk, don't trust, don't feel." Can you talk to that a little bit?
Did everybody hear that? Did everybody hear that? The question was that they've heard the phrase "don't talk, don't touch, don't feel."
Trust.
Don't trust, don't feel. That's me. Okay.
He can rub my back.
Okay.
No, just kidding. So you don't trust, you don't feel, and you don't talk. That's code on the street, right? You don't talk to anybody. You don't tell them what's going on because you don't trust anybody. And if you talk, then you're going to be labeled a rat. And you definitely don't feel because there's so much going on inside of you and around you. Then you have to deal with that pain and you don't know how, so you just numb it. That's my experience growing up with a criminalized family, right? So.
I guess when I think of the family dynamic around don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and I think about how, there was absolutely no kind of, healthy communication in our family. We basically thrived as like one cell that was just totally, that had fungus growing all over it, just if you want to visualize it. And, us family members, showing up every day, and yet there was no, real ties that were created. And so, I never felt safe. I didn't feel safe enough to talk to my parents, and I had absolutely no trust in what was happening. And so coming from that and going in, I was a perfect candidate for being a gang member or going into, as a prostitute, because I could just, do what I needed to do. Basically, they called the women like us like soldiers. We were on the street. Right? We were soldiers because we didn't let our emotions get involved. It was about get it done, do it, and the fastest way, which made us very valuable as people out there. So that would be my experience with the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel.
Yeah, it was never safe to be vulnerable. It was looked at as a weakness, right? So by feeling or trusting or speaking, you showed some kind of vulnerability. Today, I understand it as a strength, because it takes a lot of courage to tell your truth and honestly, and to speak honestly, and to be honest with what you're feeling. Because everyone in my home was like, "It's all good. Thanks for sharing. Touching story. Gotta go." Doesn't work.
Anybody else over there?
I've got a question that I'd like to ask each of the three of you. And before I ask the question, I should tell you that I was for about 40 years, one of those persons who you appeared before from time to time. You've told us very movingly about your experiences in prisons, and I would like to hear from each of you, quite briefly perhaps, or not so briefly, what about your experiences in Portland? When Senator Nix this morning, she talked about the fact that since 1999, after the Supreme Court of Canada spoke in the Glad-You case, there has been the requirement that people like me, judges, pay special attention to Aboriginal offenders, and perhaps particularly when the person appearing in court is a woman. And about your experiences in courtrooms and how many times the judges ever mentioned the words "glad you" when you were.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to start because I was just subpoenaed to court last week. And the defense attorney was asking me about a young woman that I was helping and representing, and he said, which is a very legitimate legal term, is in all your dealings with blah blah. And I said, this was my moment in court, I said, excuse me, I don't deal with any of my clients. I care for them, I love them, I support them, and I walk with them. He just stopped and looked at me, and the judge went, good point. And the defense attorney went, all right, carry on, and away we went. So, anyways, and then Chantel looked at me when you asked that question and said, can I tell the truth? And I said, yeah, you need to tell the truth.
I'm not asking for something other than a plain, unvarnished.
You'll get it.
Oh, for me.
Yeah. All three of you.
Gladu was never brought up for me. I mean, not once. I've been in courtrooms many a times, and I find irony in this because I did my sentencing over video court from PA to Regina because I just did not like that ride in that truck. I was done with it. And the one thing that I'll never forget in my sentencing was I told you I was in for drug trafficking and weapon trafficking, and you can see on the camera and it's going around, and there was a couple lawyers in that room that were customers of mine, and I was like, excuse my language, holy fuck, how fair is this? It blew me away, actually. You know, when they do pre-sentence reports, I mean, I've had pre-sentence reports done on me, and then intense bail supervision reports done on me, and that was over a phone with a probation officer, and it was a matter of, I'm not kidding, a 3-minute phone call, and that's all the time they took. But honestly, to take ownership for myself, I didn't know how to be honest about all of those things that I can be now. So I would have never been honest in a pre-sentence report about my past or what happened to me or how I got to where I was, because I did not know how to talk. I did not know how to express what happened, and I definitely didn't want to feel it, so.
Ultimately, every time that I stood before a judge, you know, I felt railroaded all the time, even by my lawyer, who was usually hired through legal aid because I couldn't afford an actual lawyer ever. And the one thing that was really quite infuriating was this feeling of almost at my expense, you know, I was being practiced on by legal aid, and then there was this camaraderie that happened between the judge, the Crown, and my lawyer. And it was almost like there was no kind of feeling of compassion, or maybe we should like stop laughing about the fact that she's going to jail for 2 years. It was just, there was almost like no, I don't know if that's etiquette or what, but that's how it was every single time. And I also remember when, you know, there was the last judge that I stood before, she said to me, crack cocaine can kill you, and I'm gonna make an example out of you. And she pointed her finger just like that at me, and all it did was make me more angry. You know, maybe her intentions, probably she was trying to maybe teach me a lesson, but you know, my experiences in court, most of the time I just felt railroaded. Usually I was too coming off drugs, so I didn't really understand what was happening. Nothing was ever explained to me, and it was already decided what was gonna happen to me as far as my fate. Ultimately, every time I stood in court, though, I just wanted to get out, and most of the time I couldn't, right? It was always, you know, you're going back for, you know, it turned from a daytime served to 10 days to 30 days to 90 days to 6 months, 1 year, and then ultimately 2 years. So, and it's on my record now by that same judge who pointed at me and shook her finger that if I have any more weapons or drugs charges, that it's an automatic 10-year sentence. That hasn't stopped me from, that didn't stop me for many years afterwards not committing crimes, but, kind of an idle threat, because that wasn't what my problem was, as you heard Paula say. It wasn't about the drugs at all. I needed some kind of therapy, like I needed help, and I didn't feel like that was understood by anybody in the systems I was in anyways.
I kind of have a different understanding or take on it, because when I spent a lot of time in the courtroom, and there was a lot of time I spent in the courtroom, this was 30 years ago, and there wasn't a whole bunch of information about the residential school. I mean, there was, but, even anyone that today that can get a social work degree doesn't have to take an Aboriginal class. So things are changing, and back then no one really addressed the fact that she's dealing with intergenerational trauma of the residential school, historic trauma and all these things. So I remember a few times Judge Arnott and other judges were like, what is wrong with you? Like, what's going on? And if anything, I felt cared for in the courtroom, because it was a time where people were actually trying to figure out what to do with me. And being brought up in an alcoholic home, you were just you speak when you're spoke to. So I spent a lot of time in the courtroom, and everyone was looking for a solution, and at the end of the day, there was no safe place. And today, I think that's a big issue as well for women that are getting out. Where do they go from there? So treatment, 28-day treatment, and then what? Go back to the same setup, the same familiar, scene of the crime type of deal. You're going right back into, just a really unsafe place. So, I'm thriving on trying to build a recovery home for women after treatment, where you're able to stay for at least a year to get some kind of healing and let, just to thaw out. So if some more judges could get together and throw some funding that way, it'd be great. Yeah.
I need to say a couple things. Is there anybody from the Law Foundation here? We owe a debt of gratitude to the Law Foundation, because for the past 2 years they funded us for a court working program and 2 lawyers that work with us. So we are in every institution every second week, speaking with the women on every unit, explaining their charges. We explain the court system. I cannot tell you how many times we talk women out of, don't fire your legal aid lawyer, and I will explain why. And then our court working program has enabled us to walk with the women while they are in the court system, and we have heard that helps a bit. We don't just tell you which room to go in, whatever. We represent you and stand with you. And we really try and create that relationship while they're, so pre, during, post, whatever. While they're incarcerated, we build a relationship with the women while they're inside, so that we can help on the outside, or help while they're in court. So the number of times that we go back into cells, explain what's going on. Most of the women we meet in court do not understand what's going on. And I cannot tell you how many times I've left court, a woman has been surprised that she will be arrested that day, usually on a Friday. And they're going, oh my God, I've got a baby in daycare, I've got 2 kids in school, and I'm picking up the child at daycare and going to school where our court workers are. And I know Elizabeth Fries across Canada are all doing the same things. It's a bit of a heartless system. The people inside really know what's going on, but the women themselves don't. It's always a surprise to the women. It's a huge surprise. So we also have another group in Saskatoon that we work very closely with, and that's Classic lawyers. We have a lot of support from community, but I know I've heard from a lot of the women that they, and we explain GLADU all the time, but a lot of the women do not want to do a GLADU report until they've known us for a while, and I'm talking 6 or 7 months, and maybe even a year, and then one of us has to be there while the GLADU writer writes it. You don't just tell your story to a GLADU writer or, who's popped in from somewhere, this is your story, man. You gotta tell it with somebody with Kleenex, or we usually use toilet paper in our office, but anyway. You know, you have to be ready to tell your story in front of a safe place and somebody. So it's very, very challenging, very, very challenging. But we find the court process getting a little bit better. Here in Saskatoon right now we have mental health courts, which we find really beneficial, domestic violence courts. We're trying, but it's a really interesting system. Anybody else have any comments about that?
I just actually have a question for you. I work in British Columbia, and one of the biggest issues that we face so many times working with women inside is they go to video reports at 9 o'clock in the morning. We don't get paperwork, the paperwork doesn't come through to the records people until after the court closes at 5.
Absolutely.
And at 6:30 at night, I'm desperately trying to find somewhere to take somebody who has no place to go, no money, no clothes that fit. And I keep saying, ask for a 24-hour sentence. It's the only thing I can think of. But I've talked to judges about this and they're like, really?
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's your experience here, but it's a huge issue for us trying to help women. And the provincial prison for women and the remand centre is 4 miles from the local bus stop. In a dark road with no street lighting.
Same thing here, and our housing sucks in Saskatchewan. I mean, it's just, you can't get into any shelter. And I always laugh when they're, you know, we often have a woman land in our office and she says, can you help me get an apartment? Apartment? I'll be lucky to get you in a, you know, some of the worst housing that you can possibly get in. Quite frankly, you're better off on a bench in the, you know, some of the parks right now. So it's very challenging for that. Same thing here. Yeah.
I'm from Upworld, University of Calgary. I'm always amazed at the number of students I have in my class who are just unbelievable survivors like you ladies are. I really want to salute you for that. I hope you see yourself as survivors more than victims today. I think that's part of your transition. I've always been astonished, you know, when we talk about Delanoy, the fact that it's going to become a non-factor today with the increasing number of mandatory minimum sentences being applied by the courts. You know, what are we doing about that? You know, I think factors like that should be considered in all cultural aspects. My question to you was, I think all of the ladies up there talk about intergenerational problems. What do we have to do to prevent the children from following that path? What can we do?
That's a whole other workshop. That's
Heal the mothers. Start with healing the mothers.
But it may be too late for the kids at that point.
it's never too late.
Yeah, it's, you know, as a mother, as a woman, as a grandmother, I've seen the ripple effect already and the different perspective that my kids had just from me being clean and sober. You know, I think a lot, take away the kids and then, you know, just like the residential school, you took away the kids and then all the parents became alcoholics. It's the same thing. You put the kids in custody. Okay, you got to do this, this, and this to get your kids back, with nowhere to go, no kids, and their primary duty and internal, you know, duty is to care for their kids. So they're broken, you know, and then they're gonna drink, and then sometimes drink more, and then, so I mean, it's. I thrive on healing the mothers. So many mothers are missing from the homes.
But those mothers need good funding on reserve for education. I mean, poverty issues, homelessness, justice. I worked in I've been a children and youth advocate for 25 years of my life, and I thought the education and social service system sucked. The justice system sucks 4 rungs further down. I mean, there is so many inequalities in a lot of the places and spaces our First Nation children are at right now. So politically, that's a big political, that's a workshop for all day. But I do have somebody here I'm gonna call on, my friend Jazz Kieran Dillon, who, Jazz Kieran and I have worked together on a lot of issues on justice for girls for a lot of different years. But could you just maybe make one statement about that? She's in a workshop this afternoon.
Nothing like being called on unexpectedly.
I told you if you know me, you're going to be doing something.
Right. Hi. So my work is primarily with Indigenous youth. I've been an advocate in Vancouver and Saskatoon for many years. I'm based in New York City now, but I come home very often. I'm born and raised here in Saskatchewan. Thinking about how to address issues of intergenerational violence, I think part of what we need to do is think critically about our social institutions. And I'm going to push us a little harder to think about our social institutions within the framework of settler colonialism, within the context of settler nation state that we know of Canada as Canada, that actually has a vested interest in continuing to occupy Indigenous land and territory. And part of the way to do that is by continuing to dispossess and marginalize Indigenous children and youth. And this is reflected in numerous social institutions, from the child welfare system, across the criminal justice system, into the education system, to the healthcare system. So it requires us to move away from individual instances and cases. And I applaud the women that are sitting up at the front of the room for sharing their extremely courageous stories, because what they've described is basically an entire set of life experiences that exist against the backdrop of colonial occupation. So I thank you very much for being so generous and giving with your experience and your courageous attempts to make a difference in a context that's very difficult to work with. That's my statement.
That was so much better than I could have. Thank you, Jess, Karen. Our time is almost up, so I'm going to ask the women one more question before we leave. And I just can't tell you how strong and beautiful and successful these women are, but yet struggles every day. I mean, we cry and laugh together all the time. So when you see people in Tim Hortons crying, it could be us. So if your last word, your best piece of advice, your wishes, any last words for all of us?
You're going to hit me.
I'm going to hit you. Yeah, no, I'm not going to hit you. Here you go. Your hope for the future. Your hope for you.
Somebody from another E-Fry adopt me for 6 months. I've asked a few people last night, but you know what?
I'm taking offense to that.
I love you. I love you. I just want to travel, not in a bad way. I don't know, my last words of hope. I was waiting this whole time for my sisters from the lodge to walk in here. And my last words of hope would be to them. It's not easy, and it's a struggle, but it's definitely worth it. Just keep walking in that way, and it's a good way with a good heart and good intent. And so many faces in this room right now that I see have been on my journey with me since I got released. And I want to thank you guys, and I want to thank everybody else for being here that will continue to walk with me on this journey.
So we've all had the opportunity up here to be that voice for the women who are locked up and who are out there struggling, and to broaden that scope, for basically, the community and the human family that are in fact hurting, whichever way that manifests, whether it is committing crime, as a result of the intergenerational and colonization. It goes back for like hundreds of years. And it can be frustrating, but at the same time, it's because of, the people that have impacted my journey by sharing their stories of success and the recovery of themselves, and ultimately showing me their vulnerability, that, I was able to see that I could do the same. And ultimately, my work today is to pass on that same kind of strength to people that are out there, not just people in the system, but to the human family. That is our responsibility, to share our stories and to, pass on our information and our wisdom. And ultimately, I think that we're all here because we're thinking less of ourselves, and we need more of that in the world. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Georgina. Well, you heard me share about, my huge passion to open a recovery home for women, providing a safe place for at least 6 months to a year after treatment. What was really stuck in my head is with the lady that spoke from British Columbia, where you were asking the lady to ask for time. So, when you think about that, yes, could I please have some more time in a cage? Because I don't have a safe place to go. And that just, I get it. I've been there, and I wholeheartedly believe that, recovery homes need to be everywhere. I came to in Vancouver, and I was blessed with being in a recovery home for a year, because it took me a year to get my head out of my ass, literally. And 28 days is just scratching the surface. So if, there's a lot of healing that needs to take place with the intergenerational trauma, and even with the new generations of, kids that are out there suffering from addiction. I'm in the field, so just when you said, please ask for 24 hours, just that awareness is, and I remember saying, I'll take 6 months, please. They offered me when I was a youth to go to the ranch or a different foster home. I said, no, I'll take 6 months. So that's the reality, and it's harsh, but there's better places to be than in a cage, for sure.
So to end, we're just going to read one more story, and representing all the women who wear masks in our society and the women in jails. The reason I painted this photo has so much to do with my past and my future. On the colorful side is my future. There are rainbow colors. It represents my personality along with the butterfly. My heart on there is now not broken. I have dealt with some stuff I needed to. I am also a social butterfly. I have 2 marks under my eyes that represents this. I'm a Native person who has survived abuse on many levels. I've survived residential school. Also, there are flowers that represent my inner child starting to bloom, someone who I buried a long time ago. On the side where it's dark, it's where the mischievous smile comes a lot. There are different words on there where I felt growing up from residential ways. The loss I suffered with the loss of my brother due to suicide. The tears from all the pain I've held in, but there was still a smile with all this pain. The bars where it all landed me due to alcohol and what has caused my pain. There's a purple eye which represents the abuse I've had. There are 2 sides to every individual in the world. The painting represents me and what I've gone through. Thanks, everyone.